So there's this one problem that I've been having over the past few years where a video game that I'm a fan of will have a television or movie adaptation announced for it. And like the fool that I am, I always let my curiosity get the better of me. So I'll take the time out of my day to go and watch the adaptation when it releases, and then I'll end up quietly molding to myself that the company behind it has the sheer audacity to promote something that they clearly didn't care about making. And when I try to talk about it to my friends and family who aren't that into TV, movies, or even video games for that matter, the conversation usually goes like, "Hey, so I just watched that new movie that came out. Oh, that's cool. What did you think about it?" And to be honest, that's a really hard question for me to answer. I've always found it difficult to put how I'm feeling into words, so when people ask my opinions on things, my mind always goes blank. But I finally decided things are going to be different. I've got a YouTube channel now, which means I can subject all of you to my opinions on all the video game adaptations I've watched over the past few years. Some of them were good, some of them were bad, some of them were very good, and some of them were very bad. But my main goal today is to talk about all of them, a lot of them, and condense them down into one big schizo rant of a video. By the way, if you're new to this channel, or heck even a long time watcher, I just want to let you know that this will definitely be the furthest thing from my previous review/recommendations. So if you came in with those expectations, you should probably leave while you still can. But if that sounds like your kind of jam and you want to see a 24-year-old talk about movies and shows that either made me want to tear up with joy or violently defenestrate myself, then as always, feel free to strap in, strap on, grab a friend, put this video on loop for easy views, and as always, feel free to let me know if there's any movies or shows I might have missed out on in the comments below. But with all that said, let's get this video started, with the first adaptation being a movie called The story of Mortal Kombat is about a washed-up MMA fighter called Cole Young being attacked by this spooky ice zombie dude called Sub-Zero for being a bearer of the Dragon Mark. What's the Dragon Mark, I hear you ask? Well, that's a great question, James. The Dragon Mark is a symbol used to identify a champion chosen to defend Earthrealm in the upcoming Mortal Kombat tournament. Imagine, if you will, Disneyland tattooed a tier 5 ticket onto the back of you and 10 others, but if someone kills you, they get the tattoo instead. So, after getting his ass saved for the first of many times, Cole finds out he's just one of several warriors chosen to defend the Earth in this upcoming tournament between realms. But the problem is that Cole doesn't have anything special, powers, or gimmicks going for him. So when he's brought before Raiden, this thunder god with a really cool hat, he, the other nominees, along with you, the audience, couldn't care less. But Cole won't let Glowy Eye McGee's opinion stop him from protecting everything he cares about, so he begins training with Raiden's 2 students and fellow Earthrealm champions Liu Kang and Kung Lao. It didn't matter what it took, he was going to prove everyone's opinion about him wrong, even if it cost him everything. Now, I could go on and talk about the rest of the plot in detail, but rather than try to explain itself, the movie lets its fight scenes do most of the talking. It knows you're not here to watch this movie for a gripping family drama, you're here to watch brutal and gory fight scenes with cheesy 90s one-liners thrown in. And there's a scene where Jax fights Reiko, which had me fucked up for days. I was laughing so damn hard at the practical effects of this man's head exploding, I was coughing my goddamn lungs out. Did they completely change Reiko's character? Absolutely. Did I care? Not really. And for that, I have to give a lot of credit to the director Simon McQuoid. McQuad. For his first feature-length film, he did incredibly well translating a lot of the costumes, characters, and goofy-ass moments to the big screen. He has a character say the word fatality out loud while dying, and it's the goofiest shit ever. Just look at the framing on some of these shots. You can just feel the attempt to emulate the games here, and it makes you want to stand up and applaud the effort. It's by no means a good movie, but it's a fun time about a guy who says fuck you, fight me, and then proceeds to extract 10 buckets worth of blood from someone's pinky toe. Coming from a director who clearly tried to make a coherent movie narrative out of this game about men and women kicking the snot out of each other for no particular reason. It's the definition of we tried our best, and you know what, I can respect it. It's hard to make a compelling modern narrative from the story of an old game franchise and have it resonate with modern audience. So anyway, Castlevania is a dark fantasy action horror series with a compelling modern narrative taken straight from an old game franchise, and in my completely professional and not at all biased opinion, is one of the few shows holding the dying fibers of Netflix together. So let me give you a summary of what the story is about, okay? So we start off with this blonde woman named Lisa meeting the big man, Count Dracula himself. Now Lisa has so much riz, she's not only able to charm Dracula into eventually marrying her, but she gets him to travel the world like a normal man because he doesn't really get out of his magical castle much. Now, as was the case for most of the Middle Ages, science was a no-go. So can you guess what happens to Count Dracula's wife when the church discovers all the books, apparatus and scientific knowledge she learned from him inside her house? That's right. They accuse her of being a wooden duck. So Lisa is burnt at the stake right as Dracula comes home, which makes him come to the ever so agreeable decision that humanity has had its chance and he's gonna give them all exactly 1 year's head start to run away before he unleashes his entire undead horde to scour every last human off the planet. The church meanwhile plays this off as superstitious nonsense from the devil and makes the ever so smart decision to completely ignore everything that just happened. So flash forward a year and this is where the story begins. So if you take an alcoholic monster hunter, a naive mage, and a blonde twink with daddy issues, put them together and make them fight against the undead hordes of Count Dracula, and not only do you get the main cast of our show, but also the plot of the entire first season. Yeah, they decide to team up to fight him and it just ends. I'm not entirely sure what happened during the planning stage for this show, but I can only imagine that this first season was some sort of test to see if people wanted more. It's 4 episodes long and ends right after the main team get together. Like, can you imagine what that would have been like if the show was cancelled and didn't go any further? Ah yes, we're all ready to fight my father. Let's go. Yeah, sorry about that, Chief. That ain't happening. Can you imagine how asinine that would be? That would be like if Final Space didn't get its final season to show off how the universe was saved after everything went to shit. Oh wait. Honestly, Castlevania is the type of show I'd consider to be the fine wine of Netflix adaptations. The characters are all grounded and down to earth, and the dialogue honestly sounds like people were ad-libbing real arguments the entire time. Even since the show ended, it's held up phenomenally, and the older seasons don't feel dated in the slightest. I remember when season 1 first dropped back in 2017, I dropped everything I was doing just to binge every episode back to back. I love the style of the old Castlevania games, and feel free to call me a heretic all you want, but I thought Lords of Shadow was a really fun game. And seeing these games brought to light in not only a faithful, but thoroughly entertaining adaptation is a delight to see. It's not often you watch an anime show where the English cast is easily the best way to watch it. Nuances, dialogue, and even the swearing fits this Eastern European setting like a well-worn glove. And there's just something that hits different about watching a prim and proper vampire swearing like the local youth outside your Tesco's. And speaking of prim and proper vampires, allow me to introduce the Council of Sisters, ladies and gentlemen. Castlevania. Come for the action and horror, stay for the lesbian vampire politics. The introduction of these 3 in season 3 really amps the show up to a whole new level. No more are we isolated in Dracula's slow demise, now we're uncovering plans for global domination and turning humans into cattle. The introduction of Striga, Marana and Lenore did wonders not only for fleshing out Carmilla as a character, but also the wider vampire world. And these 3 delightful dishes of sweet, pragmatic and beefcake all have their own history and goals. It just ties so well together, I can't praise this show enough. And I know what you're thinking, oh, they just threw Lenore into the story so we'd have a conventionally attractive vampire for the audience to endear themselves to. Trust me, they want you to find the conventionally attractive vampire the hottest one, but that's where you're wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Because Striga no-diffs every other character in this show. Those arms can hold and support not only my hopes and dreams, but my student debts too, so she easily takes the #1 spot for best character in my opinion. Except maybe for Trevor, but like, come on, that's cheating. Richard Armitage's voice could get anyone pregnant. Now, I want you to tell me if this sounds like a compelling and intriguing narrative to you. 2 opposing sides come into open war with each other, with one side defending their home from what they see as savage invaders claiming land and resources, and the other trying to make a new home for themselves after having previously escaped from their dying world. One side is a shamanistic and more old-world collection of tribes, and the other a more refined and civilized kingdom touting minor technological prowess. If you said yes at any point during that brief description, then allow me to introduce 2016's Warcraft. Yes, you heard me right. Warcraft is a video game movie based on none other than the hit MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV. And let me tell you, my thadies and gentlethems, fans could not have been more excited, nor critics more confused that this game, sponsored by the likes of Ozzy Osbourne, Chuck Norris, and Mr. Night Elf Mohawk himself, was getting a silver screen adaptation. So before I get into the plot of the film, I just want to talk about how the people in charge of this movie were able to get it to look this damn good on a relatively tame movie budget. These orcs and the entire setting they're in looks so damn good, and the CG feels so well made. Like, you're telling me the Lion King remake had an additional $100 million budget compared to this film, and they couldn't even make a single character come close to Mr. Spicy Mountain Dew? For shame, Disney. The budget difference is not the only large gap this film is making, however, as the colossal strides they had to take to dumb down over 30 years worth of world building and storytelling so that even the most casual of cinema goers could fully enjoy it would be a monumental task for even the most talented director. So it's really helpful the film says, don't worry about it, and foregoes the explanation entirely. Like, let me list just a few examples for you. Why did the orcs' homeworld die? Don't worry about it. Oh, there's these weird looking aliens in cages. What are they? Don't worry about it. Why does everyone trust a guy so clearly evil he makes Palpatine look like a blobfish? Don't worry about it. Why does I said don't worry about it. So you're probably asking yourself at this point, just what was it that the folks over at Activision Blizzard had been cooking up for this movie? Was it a small-scale story meant to ease us into the world of Warcraft? Or was it gonna be a character-driven drama to really connect us to the politics and machinations within this world? Neither. It was 3 years of a 5-year war condensed down into what seemed like a 3-week time period in a movie barely over 2 hours in length. With so many character names, places, and things thrown at you, you'd have to write a damn book in the theatre just to keep track of it all. So for the not big-brained individuals like myself that often get confused, you have the orcs on one side and humans on the other. I mean, look, if you've ever played Warcraft Orcs and Humans, it's just that, but much less in depth, with some minor changes to characters here and there. Gotta promote that failing expansion after all. You could have been the greatest, and look what they did to you. And you can form an opinion or say what you want about the movie based on that info alone, but I really like this movie. I mean, sure, Martin Scorsese probably wouldn't give it the time of day, but as someone who's spent countless hours listening to audiobooks, reading the novels, and playing the games, I just find this universe fascinating. And while I do recommend this film to you even if you have zero knowledge of what Warcraft is, that does come with a minor warning. I know I praised the CG earlier on, but you kinda sorta have to cut this film in half while watching it, because you will not care for any of the human cosplayers. I would say characters, but no. Discount DiCaprio talks like a plank of wood, Khadgar doesn't radiate near enough dad energy, and the less said about the makeup for Garona the better. It's just so bizarre to me that in a fantasy movie about humans having to defend their land and way of life from an invading army, that the 8-foot-tall, completely CGI orcs are the more compelling characters. Like, I genuinely believe Durotan's shoulders needed to be this wide now in order to carry the weight of everything. My man puts in the work. And while Warcraft's seriousness as a franchise isn't known for being any more than ankle deep, what with its gnomes, kung fu pandas, and the literal embodiment of the furry community, you can tell that the director loves this universe and wanted to bring it to the masses in a faithful way. So I say good on you, Mr. Duncan Zowie Jones. Wait a minute, holy shit, the director is the son of David Bowie? How did I just find this out now? So the level of care put into the film when it came to faithfully adapting everything can genuinely be described as second to none. Between the dwarven city of Ironforge, the human city of Stormwind, to even the iconic orcs of Warcraft history, every little detail is exactly how any longtime fan will remember it, even if in the context of the movie itself it means very little. Watching this feels like a strained labour of love, with the director having to fight his superiors to make the movie he wanted compared to the movie they wanted to sell. But that's what I absolutely love about this movie, and despite its very obvious flaws, at the time of me recording this, it has held the title of the highest grossing movie based on a video game since its release. If you were to ask the critics what they thought of it, however, they would certainly tell you otherwise, with them claiming that this franchise has little evident cinematic value, which I dispute. I know they originally had planned to make a sequel for this film, but I think it's safe to say that that idea has been more than long abandoned by now, but I don't mind. In In fact, I think that's okay. Trust me, I'm sure people will want more movies set in this universe if they're done correctly. And no, this isn't me overdosing on copium, okay? In fact, I'll even do the heavy lifting for you, Blizzard. Behold, the face of the new Warcraft trilogy. Look, just cast Henry Cavill as Arthas and we'll call ourselves even for whatever the hell this was, okay? So before I go on a long schizo rant about why I absolutely hate this show, I just want to preface two things. One, I'm not that knowledgeable about the Halo lore. I played Combat Evolved through to Reach when I was younger, but I haven't kept up since. And two, I assure you the hatred I have for this show is coming from the most rational of places if you too have had the unfortunate pleasure of watching this travesty. After hearing so many complaints about the world building, I had to do my own brief research into the history of this universe. And now thanks to that, I have to be reminded of how fucking dumb and stupid this show is. Let me just ask a question for all the people who are both up to date on this franchise and also like this franchise. The question being, when you played Halo, what was the standout moment to you? What story beat hit you the hardest? And do me a favor and just let that stew for a while I talk, because we're going to come back to that in just a second, okay? So the show starts off with this teenager called Quan living in a remote outpost called Madrigal that gets invaded by a collective religious extremist group known as the Covenant. Several people lose their lives hilariously before the outpost is saved SpongeBob style by Silver Team, a group of Spartan soldiers headlined by everyone's beloved Master Chief. They save the day and evacuate who they can, but Quan blames the UNSC for everything that happened. They brought the Covenant there, everyone she knows and loves was killed, yada yada, it's all very sad. And to make things worse, within the space of a day of meeting her, Chief decides he trusts this young child who was threatening to shoot him in the face unconditionally, and even takes his helmet off to prove it to her. Now I may be stupid, but one, I'm pretty sure the whole point of Master Chief is that he never takes the helmet off, and two, why would showing her you actually have a face make her hate you any less? Because this child has done nothing but threaten to kill you since she got here, because she blames you for causing the death of her father. And then, when Chief's about to be arrested for not doing what he was ordered to do, this magic space rock he picked up from a dumpster decides to let the two of them escape together. I'm sorry, don't you find it just a little bit too convenient that the ancient magic rock you found earlier that day can knock out all the power to this modern facility, but simultaneously restore power to the one tiny ship that Chief and Quan are on, when the only thing it's shown capable of doing so far was giving him prophetic visions? This isn't Burger King. You can't have the MacGuffin your way. Anyway, while these two frenemies are off figuring things out, the entire infrastructure of the UNSC is practically falling apart on its own. The scientist in charge, Dr. Halsey, is causing problems by creating an AI clone of herself. The Spartans are going through superhuman puberty by taking out their emotional suppressors. The other scientists are in this sort of elitist competition on who gets to study the magic rock. Then the main character starts having flashbacks of someone familiar. And then, get this, about 3/4 of the way through the show, they just get rid of Quan. She has somewhat of a character arc about wanting to leave the planet she's on, only to come to the conclusion that she can't leave at all. Because who would protect it otherwise? And then she just disappears for good. Oh yeah, the Forerunners exist. Yeah, I don't really care about anything that's happening. So I feel like any rational person would have started to pick up on the fact that Halsey is not a good person, and that anything related to the Covenant should never be trusted. And it takes everyone a little bit of time to come to these decisions, but they get there in the end. And you would think with the amount of problems this device has caused so far, you should probably lock it up in Space Fort Knox, throw away the cell key, and never speak of it again. But no, somehow beyond all the common sense in the world, Master Chief is just allowed to walk up and touch it whenever he damn well feels like it. And this is the main problem that I have. This character, if I could even call him that, is not Master Chief. This is John Space Marine. He just happens to look like the character we all know and love. He suffers from the worst case of main character syndrome I've ever seen. Everything in the story revolves around him. If he's not there, nothing gets done. I understand that Master Chief was an integral part of the Halo game's story, but things still happened in the world around him that he eventually got caught up in. But the predominant driving force behind every conflict, conversation, or political movement in this show seems to rest on the shoulders of this soggy ham sandwich. And maybe at this point you're like, Nefri, there's no way they could mess up Master Chief that badly, right? I'm not kidding you, and I wrote this down, by the way. In episode 8, John Space Marine realizes he's sharing visions of the Keystone with this woman called Mackie, who was left behind in a previous episode by the Covenant, which is not suspicious at all, but who am I to say? He convinces the UNSC to allow her to work on the Keystone, which the Covenant have fought tooth and nail for up to this point, proceeds to have sex with her while Cortana watches on like she's goddamn Javert before Mackie ends up betraying him anyway and taking the Keystone straight to the Covenant. Who could have seen that coming? And what's worse is that when they get to the Covenant's planet to take the Keystones back, the budget decides to intermittently kick in and we actually get a cool looking fight scene. Granted, it's all CGI and feels like it's got all the weight of a wet chihuahua, but at least it makes Chief look lore accurate for all of 10 seconds. Meanwhile, Cortana is doing almost nothing this entire time. You know that super advanced AI that should be predicting where people are and shit, or helping out in any meaningful way? Yeah, nothing. Until John gets shot and starts dying. Great job, Cortana. And then she has the audacity to start piloting his body around like a goddamn meat suit in armor. And that's supposed to be how Chief becomes like he is in the games? What is this? Fucking Evangelion? And then it just ends. It just ends in the dumbest way humanly possible, and none of it made any fucking sense. I watched 9-hour-long episodes of the dumbest shit ever. So now that I've recomposed myself, go ahead and take the lid off. Let that stew breathe a little. To the people that are probably mad at me right now, please answer the question. What the fuck is the point of any of this? Is there some kind of theme I'm missing here? Because I need someone to tell me right now what theme is supposed to justify Master Chief clapping cheeks like he's Johnny goddamn Sins. So believe it or not, Monster Hunter is a game that holds a little bit of a special place in my heart, despite me not being particularly good at it. One of the main reasons being that the cooperative nature and literal thrill of the hunt, combined with the tomfoolery of a slightly buzzed friend group, leads to some incredibly funny evenings, and equally hype moments when you finally figure out how to kill that damn gorilla that's been plowing your face into the dirt all week. And if I'm being completely honest, I feel like this is the type of game that should have translated naturally really well into a movie. The Monster Hunter titles aren't exactly known as being narrative masterpieces. They usually just lay the groundwork for you like, oh, these monsters are threatening our way of life. Please deal with them. And you, the player, go, okay, and proceed to yeet a sword 3 times your size made of several creatures' dead mothers directly at the problem. And while this particular method of problem solving might not solve the writing process, it should allow for a fairly simple story backed up by a lot of high action set pieces. I feel like I just have a really weak spot for films that revolve around cool action sequences where the plot could be anything from revenge, to cooking, to driving a car, to eating food, or just however the hell the director is feeling on that particular day. It's almost like these sequences exist purely just to show off how infectiously cool they are. They make me just want to try harder, man. So let me tell you, dear viewer, how this film is the ultimate exception to that. Monster Hunter the movie is a 2020 monster film written, produced, and directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. And if that name isn't ringing any bells to you, he's the guy behind the many, many Resident Evil movies over the years. It follows the story of Ranger Captain Artemis, who is traveling through the desert with her platoon on the lookout for some missing soldiers, when all of a sudden a strange storm whips up out of nowhere and she, along with everyone in her convoy, finds themselves transported to an alternate world, where they come under attack almost immediately by a giant desert-dwelling creature called Diablos. Now I don't know if it's just me, but what is it with major movies based on already popular franchises that like to forcibly include the military by any means possible? It happened in the Transformers franchise, it happened in Battleship, but now it's happening here. Does the military just pick and choose which film franchise they want to fund? Because I promise there are better ones to choose out there than a story based on hitting monsters in the head with a giant saxophone made from the spine of a T-Rex. And this sort of problem is something Monster Hunter runs into a lot throughout its runtime. It almost feels like the people behind it were afraid that if they didn't give some sort of relatability to the characters, then the film wouldn't sell. And that's why they decided to make it about people from our world ending up in the new world trying to find their way back home. Which is a completely dumb change if you ask me, and I think that when stuff like this happens it purely comes comes down to the choices made by the director. Now, I don't think Paul W.S. Anderson is an awful director by any accounts. I find Event Horizon to be a fantastic sci-fi horror, and whether intentionally or not, it's one of the best interpretations of what the Warp from Warhammer 40k would be like. But everything else he's made has ranged on a scale from meh to mediocre. So I think it's completely reasonable for me to say that I don't dislike him for the fact he makes mediocre movies. No, I dislike Paul W.S. Anderson because he makes financially successful mediocre movies. The Resident Evil franchise to date has earned nearly $1.3 billion, with 2 entries being in the top 10 highest grossing video game movies of all time. Which comes as a surprise to me, as whenever I ask anyone about what they thought about these, the responses unanimously agree that they're very dumb, nonsensical, and a complete departure from the games. With the most egregious change being the character of Alice. She has no ties to anything, is a complete blank slate, and is seemingly capable of doing whatever the plot happens to demand of her at any given moment. And it's this sort of made up for the movie character with no ties to the original source material that bleeds into Monster Hunter. The whole premise of the game is about you creating a hunter that could be anyone from anywhere within this world, but for all intents and purposes, Artemis is just Alice from Resident Evil with a coat of military paint on. She's perfect in every way, has no flaws, and doesn't need to learn or grow as a person in order to overcome the problems that she faces. Even when being trained by the hunter, she doesn't have to really practice, she becomes proficient almost immediately, and it's because of how perfect Artemis is that the film does away with pretty much all the sense of cooperation that the games are widely known for. There's no commissions or hunts made by the people struggling against these monsters. Even the guild, despite making a brief appearance, come across as a ragtag group of survivors that consists of references, and that's literally it for the side characters. There's no one else that even exists in this world. It's just Artemis and the hunter, teaming up to take down whatever gets in their way in order to get her back home. But if I had to give the film a little praise, at least it didn't mess up the Calico cooking scene, and the characters it did give us, however brief, remained very faithful to their original iterations. But the fundamental changes are this film's biggest flaw. It ended up turning Mila Jovovich from a monster hunter among dozens into the monster hunter. And the main problem with that lies in the fact that if I don't like the main character of the movie, the chances I'll stay invested in the rest of it dramatically decrease. Now, most modern media love a good reference or callback. It's an easy way for a film to garner interest from its audience by pointing and urging you to look at the shiny thing. You remember the shiny thing, right? But much like everything else this film tries to do, it just comes across as flat and unearned. When Artemis uses devil mode on her dual blades, I was just sat thinking, whatever. When they show her infusing her weapons in the Rathalos fight, you think that would be cool, right? Except she infuses them with fire, an element long-time Monster Hunter fans know the monster is completely immune to. And it's these small changes that build up for fans of the series, as if the fundamental parts of the game they're taking reference from are being done wrong, then what's left to keep them interested? The new story they decided to use? Oh boy, I can't wait to see how the military uses a machine gun to down a giant fire-breathing dragon. That's so much cooler than the 1080-degree Chancellor Palpatine Michael Jordan spin through the air that insert original character here could have done with their insect glaive. That's what bothers me the most. The plot could have been anything. Why did you have to turn this movie into a goddamn isekai, where nothing is explained except, "Hoorah, gotta kill the monsters"? What type of story were you trying to tell here? Because I've gotten more plot out of the titles of some light novels than this travesty of a movie. Wait, I feel like I'm getting sidetracked. What was this video about again? Oh, right, video game. So you know how people have made lists on some of the worst video games of all time and some that are actually worth checking out? Well, for anyone out there that is genuinely put off by the idea that Arcane is based on League of Legends, I've put together a small list of things that you should do in order to get the most out of this show. Number 1. Grow the fuck up and watch the show already, it's fantastic. This show is seriously the best case of I'm thinking 5 stars. I only even found out about it at the time because my friends who play a lot of League told me it was getting made, to which I promptly laughed at them. And after taking some time to watch it, I can safely say that this show is a very poor adaptation of the game, as no one called me a slur within the first 5 minutes of starting. Arcane is one of the most captivating opening episodes of any show I've ever seen, and little did I realise this was going to lead to 9 hours worth of some of the greatest and best written storytelling I'd ever experienced. Like, how the hell do you turn this into this? And it's made by the French. So I had absolutely no clue how they managed to make a show based on one of the most widely hated games and have it turn out so good. So the title Arcane refers to the magical essence that permeates the world that our characters reside in. Some people are born with it, some people aren't. It's not really a fair system, but it's mainly a background driving force that exists. So we meet our main characters of Violet and Powder on a heist with their friends in this fancy city called Piltover to steal whatever they deem valuable enough to sell when they get back home. So they end up stealing some small blue crystals, but when Powder accidentally drops one, it collapses an entire side of a building. So you can imagine at this time that I'm watching this thinking to myself, oh yeah, this is definitely going to be something special. Because not only was the show gorgeous to look at in the way only 3D done right can, but watching Powder view things from her perspective and how the lingering effects of her trauma and PTSD affect her actions, or how she perceives conversations is fascinating. She'll have a minor disagreement with someone she cares about, but when viewing it over in her head, she immediately jumps to the conclusion that she's not worth being around. And just based on this opening episode alone, I was fully on Team Riot. I was ready to sit down for the next 9 hours and watch a modern masterpiece unfold. And then I realised that they were releasing 3 episodes at a time with several weeks in between each batch, and that I was going to have to wait for more like some sort of peasant. So a lot of shit happens to our group of misfits, some of them die, Powder gets accidentally abandoned by her sister and is now going by her new identity known as Jinx. And you're probably feeling like you missed something important. But no, there's a time skip between episodes 3 and 4 that the show does not tell you about, and you're just supposed to infer what's happening from the proceedings on screen. And it's at this point revealed that the driving force behind everything that's happened in the story, both topside and below, is because this suave and crusty businessman wants to turn this ramshackle underground into its own independent nation. Now I know some of you may not find that to be a particularly interesting premise, but you're wrong. At the time, I was fully on board with whatever the show wanted. Literally all I wanted was a good looking show and to watch these two sisters grow and develop as people while keeping their sisterhood alive and well despite all the adversity they faced in the world, which is where the story seemed to be heading for those first 3 episodes. But then Powder is unintentionally abandoned by her sister and proceeds to become a terrorist. I wasn't exactly predicting the main character of this intriguing political drama to become a terrorist, but when you're working for a man that wants to make his own nation out of brothels, bars and back alleys, anything is possible. And as I watched more and more episodes, I started to realise that this studio was way too good at what they do for their own good. Like there's a cliffhanger ending to episode 4 where they introduce this woman and she's seen punching holes in a solid brick wall, and they end the shot with her dripping sweat down her muscled back, and it's all animated so well. Why would they do this to me? Was I supposed to finish that episode and start barking at the credits? What did they mean by this? But as the story continues to progress, there was less outwardly spoken exposition and a lot more internal conflict, and my brain was starting to ascend with it all, because as more characters got introduced, the more I realised that by the end of this story, everyone who had been shown on screen was going to be affected in some way by the events that would occur. Even from the very beginning, the side characters themselves are often some of the most exciting parts of the story. Sure, finding out what Violet, Powder, or any of the people they are directly involved with are getting up to is great, but finding out just a fraction of the history between Benzo and Vander is pure writing genius. And as we get more and more of these side characters introduced as the show goes on, I realised, oh god, it's like this for all of them. Every time a character is given a name or is in any way involved with one of the main characters, they often end up stealing the spotlight for a short while, sometimes purely for how much they help flesh out everything that's going on and the development they help give the main cast and world at large. And again, that's not me trying to make some deep dive psychoanalysis at the studio or anything. I just think they've done a fantastic job with the story and world that they've created, and it's criminal that they've only just become widely noticed. Like, it is such a compelling experience to watch watch this show with the League of Legends character designs changed just enough to not only be instantly recognizable, but realistic and lived in, and the animation and writing expands from a simple story about a family of thieves to this multifaceted saga involving political discourse, betrayal, bargaining, classism, and a deep dive into the mind of someone suffering from severe psychosis. If you genuinely want to watch this show, I implore you to take the time and look at every small detail, really get into those cracks, pause it every few seconds, boil the kettle and really piss off the family trying to watch it with you. That way if anyone ever asks if you've seen Arcane, you and your 1000 IQ mind can say yes, I have seen all of Arcane. And if my insistence hasn't been enough of a selling point, I really am coming from a place of wanting to enjoy all of these shows. It's not like I wanted Halo to be the biggest travesty to ever exist, but if I wasn't passionate about these projects, I wouldn't be calling it the biggest travesty to ever exist. Which is why I'm telling you all to give Arcane a chance. I may not like League of Legends, but I've heard it has plenty of good stories to tell, and a studio that understands its source material took that and brought to the general public a fascinating and compelling story that everyone, no matter what their background or knowledge of gaming is, could enjoy, which is why it feels so goddamn amazing to recommend this absolute piece of peak fiction. Now I'm just going to be completely honest here, Detective Pikachu is an absolute blast and is one of those movies I would have no problem watching many times over, even years down the line. It's the type of film I could turn around and show my kids if I ever have any. With that being said, putting the feelings I have about this movie into a script for this video has been fairly difficult. I can't tell you the amount of times throughout this movie I smiled at something that was happening or shown on screen, but when asked to describe what I thought about it at the time, the best I could manage was, yeah, I liked it. And if I had to force myself to describe how it made me feel right here and now, the closest words that even come to mind are wish fulfillment. The movie is just really enjoyable in a way that's hard to put into words, and quite honestly, the best way I've found of getting this script finished is to just ramble on and get what's in my mind out there into the world. For a franchise that's been a part of my life since the moment I could first comprehend, seeing the creatures I'd grown up with brought to life in the way I had always imagined them gave me such a feeling of childlike joy. Like, how are you going to look me in the eye and tell me that we didn't peak at creature design with Bulbasaur? Look at this cute little goober. And this sentiment really encompasses the entire film. It was made for people that love Pokemon, by people that love Pokemon, because the care and attention that can be seen put into every small detail, from the fur, the scales, to the weirdly gross skin-like texture, the time and effort put into making this world feel alive, lived in, and daily life practically revolving around these creatures needs applauding. It's the type of cohabitation you always imagine seeing in a Pokemon game, especially nowadays, as it feels like the film does a much better job at depicting humans living in a world of Pokemon than some of the modern games in the franchise have. But rather than dwell on the missed opportunities of the mainline games, Detective Pikachu is based on a somewhat average game of the same name that released for the Nintendo DS all the way back in 2016. And aside from a few changes here and there, it's actually a pretty faithful adaptation. Fun fact, by the way, it's the first live-action film based on a Nintendo game property since the Super Mario Bros. Movie back in 1993. Nintendo have managed to keep such an ironclad grip on their franchise since that disaster that it's only taken 30 years to get another attempt at a Mario movie. And don't take this the wrong way, I do enjoy the occasional Ryan Reynolds movie, and while he is pretty good at playing a cute electric mouse, this is Ryan Reynolds playing Ryan Reynolds, so an abundant amount of one-liners and constant snarky comments are to be expected. But the awkward and straightforwardness of the dialogue and the cadence in which it's delivered actually fits within the context of this movie, that he's meant to be some kind of old-timey detective, and the clue hunting and trail following actually helps reveal to us the audience the full scope of the world in which these characters are inhabiting and the nature of day-to-day life. There's a scene later on in the movie where Pikachu and Tim are investigating an underground fighting ring, and it perfectly encapsulates the feeling of what a Pokemon club would be like if it were to exist nowadays. You've got Loudred acting as speakers, the announcers throwing Pokemon battle terms out like candy, and even the smaller, cuter Pokemon acting as trophy animals, like how most people treat small dogs these days. And the film manages to find a way to touch upon every single moment that we felt the need to hold on to from our time as children. The nostalgia, joy, the struggles of reaching a wall, the feeling of accomplishment when we overcome that hurdle, and even the childlike ponderings many of us still have now in which we've imagined how Pokemon would look in a modern day society if they were real. It is seriously seriously captivating how this movie is able to present that quirky mess of emotions and present them to you on a silver platter. It's almost like the film is saying, look, this is you. You've probably always wanted to be in a situation like this, so we made this film for you. Detective Pikachu is a very simple story with a lovingly crafted world building, based on a franchise that spans multiple generations. The hyper-realistic depictions of the Pokemon it offers, and just the sheer nostalgia kick you'll get out of watching this young trainer's journey, make it more than worth watching for anyone that has ever held love in their hearts for these little freaks of nature. Plus Ryan Reynolds is in it, which is all some of you need in order to watch a film apparently. Good on you for finding what makes you happy. But with all that said, I think it's time for us to move on to the last adaptation of this video. So given that I finally got round to watching Halo, I started to develop a small desire. If this was the worst video game to screen adaptation I'd ever had the displeasure of seeing, would it even be possible for me to find one that I considered to be absolutely faithful to its source material? But then a short while ago I kept hearing everyone mention this show that went by the name of Cyberpunk Edgerunners. I remember getting myself hyped up for the release of Cyberpunk 2077 back in 2020, as I was a big fan of the Witcher games and CD Projekt Red. I played like 20 minutes of it at the time and then called it a day, as the game was just beyond a broken mess. And this is coming from someone that loves Bethesda games, let me tell you, but it's also partially due to the shifting mindset behind gaming I was going through at the time. Companies had been over-promising, under-delivering, and straight up just lying to their consumer bases for a while. But it reached a boiling point with Cyberpunk that such a well-loved and trusted company had put out this buggy monstrosity, despite garnering so much public sympathy and delaying it for what seemed like forever. So while there were individuals at the time who were praising the game for its setting and world building, I had just wiped it from my mind, as I couldn't understand why anyone was getting so invested in it. Now I'm just going to say that one more time. I did not understand why people fell in love with this world. So for the longest time I've had the mindset that I just wasn't ever going to find myself having interest in this show. But it wasn't until very recently where I had discovered it was coming from the exact same studio that had made Promare, and my first thought was, why? Why would you try and make a show based on this disaster? Because all I can remember from those first 20 minutes was a game that screamed wasted potential to me, because nothing in it worked for longer than 10 seconds at a time. But I'm the type of person that has always learned to trust the process, so trusted I did. Cyberpunk Edgerunners is about this cocky academy student called David, who comes from a poor family that's struggling to make ends meet. And to make matters worse, on the way home from a meeting with the principal, he's caught in a drive-by shooting between two gangs that severely wounds his mother, forcing her to be hospitalized. As you can see, everything's off to a very cheerful start. Things only get worse from there when David is then promptly beaten black and blue by his classmate for having, get this, the audacity to be poor, only to then be informed over the phone that his family's insurance doesn't cover his mother's stay in hospital and that she has unfortunately passed away. Now I don't know about you, but this is an awful lot for a young person to go through in a short amount of time, so you'd think the grieving process might, he just gets this cool spine attached that lets him stop time. Now despite that bombshell of a first episode, I wasn't immediately hooked as many of you might believe. In fact, for the first couple of episodes, I was sat thinking to myself that this was just going to be some found family story set in a dystopian cyberpunk city. And it was for the most part. You've got Barrett from Final Fantasy, the token hot one, the bullet gremlin that everyone actually cares about, and Mommy. And for the first few episodes, it's sort of just gang shenanigans as they try to make their way in the underworld and stay somewhat out of trouble. But what changed is that Edgerunners finally gave context into what sort of story it was going to be in episode 4, titled Lucky You. By now, David has started to find his footing with his new family. He's training his body to keep up with his implants, he's designing his outfit to be more punk, and he's starting to understand how the criminal underworld of Night City works. He's starting to feel like he really belongs. But all that changes one night when this one insane homeless guy blows the head of one of his friends clean off, which results in the whole group having to fight for their lives. And this moment solidified two things about the story. The first is it establishes cyberpsychosis can happen to anyone whose mind can't keep up with their implants. And two, it sets the tone for the story going forward that this really isn't going to end well for anyone. Throughout the opening 3 episodes, there were brief moments where I felt maybe there's something more here, that the story has to have a much deeper meaning or a darker tone that I just wasn't seeing. And episode 4 really solidified that for me, and I couldn't wait to see just where the story was going to take me. And then episode 6 rolled around and I had my Danny DeVito I get it moment. It was at this moment when I understood why everyone had been ranting and raving about this show. The episode starts already feeling off with an uneasy tone that only builds as time goes on. The underlying tempo to the music just doesn't quite match up with how we should be feeling, and as the episode progresses, things just start to go wrong, and it all leads to a cacophonous culmination before everything goes silent. We have a small moment of clarity before everything comes crashing down around us as the episode just ends, leaving you to ponder the feeling of just what the hell you've just witnessed. I got to the end of the episode and had to sit in silence as I needed to process everything that I'd just watched. I want to sit down and talk to the people behind this production as I want to know who gave them the right to be able to play with my emotions like that so easily. God damn it. A story about dystopian cyborg criminals is not supposed to leave me this emotionally scarred. I came into this show expecting to see some violence. The very nature of the story lends itself to that. What I was not prepared for in any way was the complete emotional breakdown and character exploration this story took me on, getting me invested into a bunch of people who would sell my spine, spleen, and kidneys for literal pocket change. Trigger is the one studio that can take the most basic storyline or trope imaginable and find a way to make it the most over-the-top hype shit you can think of. And yet somehow they were able to contain all that quirkiness into a mature and thought-provoking show that dives deep into character relationships and motivations. There's still trigger moments where you have to laugh at the sheer absurdity of things happening, but for the most part, the show manages to contain itself and shows you that in this world, no one wins. Not even those that get what they want. Edgerunners not only won a whole bunch of awards, but also managed to bring back Cyberpunk 2077 from the dead. And you know what? They goddamn deserve the credit. If Trigger wanted to make another animated show based on a video game, I'd be all for it with no questions asked. And to all you watching this video that want to check this show out for yourself, I promise you you're going to start this show smiling to yourself whenever you hear this song playing, and by the end, you'll realize just why it makes so many people stare out the window in quiet contemplation. This is the adaptation I was waiting for, and I don't need anyone to hold me back from telling you all to go and watch it as soon as possible. This show made me laugh one moment and had me crying the next. When I think of the perfect video game adaptation, Edgerunners is it, and by the time you've finished watching it, you will too, goddammit.
So what you want?